Welcome to the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad, the only one dedicated to making you a faster cyclist. We're stoked to have Hannah Otto with us. Hannah, fresh off Unbound. You finished 8th place, but that doesn't really do it justice because you finished just within 2 seconds of the winner. Can we talk about that before we get into like any athlete questions? Which, by the way, a bunch of you submitted them to trainerroad.com/podcast. Thanks for doing that. And if you're watching this, you appreciate Hannah setting aside her time to walk you through a race and everything else, give it a thumbs up on this video. That would be fantastic. Subscribe, share, all that stuff. Hannah, I looked at you, which you have that you're using the Coros head unit, which is fancy and new, which is cool. And I saw that you shared like the data from that 0.81 IF for how many hours? Was it 12 or 10 and a half hours?
10 and a half
my
hours.
Gosh.
Yeah.
0.81. That's like stretching capacity.
I felt really good too. I think, gosh, I don't even know where to start with a race like this because I'm still hung up on the first thing you said, which is 8th place doesn't really tell the whole story. And so it's been an interesting sort of debrief emotionally of going through the whole roller coaster of like, oh my gosh, it was such a good race. I performed really well. Because on one hand, you just take performance when you just look at numbers, when you look at, you know, all of those sort of controllables. I think I can walk away feeling really good. But then you step back and you're like, have to say out loud, I finished 8th. And you're like, how did I let this happen? How did it slip away? Because for those who don't know, it ended up being a 9-up sprint finish. So there was 9 of us sprinting down the last straightaway, all for the win. So in the end, I was 2 seconds away from winning Unbound after 10 and a half hours in the saddle. So again, it's just so bittersweet.
No.
Like I crossed the finish line and I felt like I was just in a daze, like wide-eyed, like, what just happened? I didn't win. What?
Every race for me.
So, I mean, and that's a little bit like behind the scenes, right? Because I do think I'm sort of like the eternal optimist, and I am very, very pleased with the overall race. But I think we also have to be human and be real and be like, yeah, that hurts. That hurts to miss out.
The footage cut into the sprint pretty late. I know that there was a climb before the finish, at least I think, because kudos to Unbound or I should say Lifetime and the team for putting out these like recaps. They're like extremely high production value recaps within 48 hours after this race. It was over an hour long. It was like watching, the F1 series that you see, on like Drive to Survive and stuff on Netflix. Like that level of production, super good. And within that, I saw it looked like that climb that's famous that you climb into town. I think it's like coming off a campus or something you climb. And after that, it comes down. You have just a long straight going into the finish line. It looked like everyone was pushing pretty hard on the climb. Did you do that? And did that crack you for the straight? Because once you got into position, I was like, ooh, Hannah's perfect. She's sitting in the back. She's sitting in the wheels. She's going to be able to get momentum and come around these people. But it just didn't happen. It looked like you were telling your body to sprint and your body was just like, nope, I'm going to stay seated and I'm going to keep pedaling because that's all I can do right now.
So from the bottom of the climb to the finish was just over 2.5 minutes. So when I hit that climb, I was actually still feeling really good. And coming into the finish, this was kind of my thought processes. We've been riding for 10 and a half hours. I'm feeling really good. How many people in this group do I think can say that? And so I'm starting to think through, okay, after 10 and a half hours, I feel good. I'm banking on the fact that most people probably aren't. You can will yourself through a sprint, but maybe you can't will yourself 2.5 minutes out from the line. So I'm starting to kind of think through, how can I break people? How can I put the odds in my favor? And I think ultimately, I needed to be more patient, but I think I was really excited that I was feeling good. And so it did cut out, but I was the one who attacked on that last climb. And so I put in that effort on that climb. And the first thing is I'm thinking climb equals attack. Like this is a great place to attack. But everyone jumped on my wheel. And in that moment, I'm thinking, wow, I'm impressed. And I still am impressed. Like, kudos to all the women. Like, I don't want to sound like this, that, or the other. Kudos to all the women. Looking at my file, that climb was 47 seconds. I held 400 watts for that 47 seconds at the end of 10 and a half hours. I feel like that's pretty solid.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Just solid.
But the thing that surprised me is we were going about 20 miles per hour still up that climb. So I think even though I jumped, even though I attacked, when others jumped on my wheel, they still got a solid draft on that. We hit the top of the climb. 3 people came around me. I was able to will myself onto their wheels. Like you said, I came around that final corner, which was 1,500 feet to the finish. So about 500 meters to the finish. I'm 4th wheel. And yeah, I'm thinking I'm in a good spot. Like, I burned a match, but we're still okay. We're still okay. This is where I think that sprint experience, and if I was a crit racer or I had more experience, like, there is a ability to put yourself in the right position. That is not just a lucky thing. Like, I didn't have the right position and I got pinched off in the middle, and you can actually see in the video everyone's sprinting and I have a moment where I coast, and that was me tapping brakes because 2 people pinched me in the center. I tapped brakes, coasted, and that's all it takes to, even though it was only a second or 2, it kills all your momentum. So then when everyone else was peaking in their speed, I was trying to ramp back up to speed. And when you're talking about 2 seconds, that's all it takes.
Yeah, and I think that like Rosa Closer came around with a bunch of momentum, and she was tucked up against the boards. And in my mind, I was like, "Oh, Hannah, that could be the wheel for Hannah. This is perfect." But like you said, those riders kind of coming together in front of you, and I was kind of worried that it was going to be like a crash when I saw that they were like, because it was really tight and really close. So I would have done the same thing of like tap the brakes, because I mean, otherwise, from up top, from a heli view, it absolutely looked like a crash was going to happen. I would have hit my brakes, I'm certain, in that scenario. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's not a situation where Hannah shouldn't have hit her brakes. It's like, no, like, you know, it was unfolding directly in front of her. It's tough.
And I do wonder, you know, that's one of those things where I think in the moment, like you said, you would have hit brakes. I did hit brakes. I was nervous. I didn't want to crash. You know, I think as a sprinter, you're going to have like, not just a 6th sense, but like an 8th sense. Like, I do wonder if I was Justin Williams, how would he have responded? Like, would he have just boom, like straight through? And, you know, I don't know, but I think that's where that experience does come in. And I mean, I don't know if I've ever been in a group sprint like that. And then you tack on the fact that all of us, not just me, all of us are 10 and a half hours in, and you are not necessarily thinking the most clearly. Like, we are all exhausted. And so the trust element of yourself and others is definitely waning.
So, Hannah, looking at this with the way that it sorted out into an 8-rider sprint at the end of the race, I feel like that is absolutely the product of the fact that this is the first Unbound that the women had their own start, and it wasn't you starting with the entire field. And as a result, it actually made it so that all of you were racing together and against each other. Did it change the dynamic throughout the rest of the race? Like, now are you going to, like, is it entirely different racing with the field when you aren't starting just mass start with everybody else? How different was it?
It's an entirely different race. And I think this is why so many of us have been fighting for this, is because it changes it tremendously. When we start with the men, for us, it's usually a matter of who can go the hardest to stay on the wheels the longest, and then who blows up the least. And that's kind of how the race goes, which certainly requires someone to be strong. Like, I don't want to take away from that. Whoever is able to do that is very, very strong. But what it also does is, because we're relying on the men, it creates huge gaps that if we were alone, I think even though someone has to be strong to do that, just by the nature of drafting and like how those groups split, the gaps become so huge, because realistically, I'm not going to bridge a gap to a 10-man group with one woman in it. And so once the race is set, it's just set. Versus this gave us the opportunity where if anyone wanted to get away, it had to be purely on their own merit. And if you did get away, you couldn't hope or bank on catching a man and using them to stay away. So it became a lot more tactical in that we had to shed people on our own merit. And then if you wanted to stay away, it had to also be entirely on your own merit, which is why I think it ended up being what it was, a 9-up sprint finish at the end. Because, I mean, Lauren took a flyer off the front, and I think we saw how do you stay away from an 8-woman chase for 130 miles? It doesn't happen.
It's not going to happen.
Versus, versus if she had men up there to catch and work with, it might have stuck. But it's just a totally different race. So it's special to get to experience that.
Hannah, you said you felt really good at the end. What do you think you did leading up to it, both in training and during the race and eating, to get you to that point?
Yeah. Well, I think one, fueling, which is something we've talked about a lot here. And I've put a lot of emphasis and focus on this year, working with a dietitian and really pumping up my fueling. So everything from a 3-day carb load going into the race to, a huge, at 3 a.m, I'm consuming over 1,000 calories before the start of this race.
Good job.
Thank you.
Too.
That's awesome.
And I think it's so important because and I think it's important to put a number on that because people think, oh yeah, I ate a good breakfast. But a good breakfast doesn't mean that you ate enough. And by enough, we're talking about, like I said, I'm eating 1,000 calories before getting on that start line. That's a lot of food. And then throughout the race, I was consuming 115 grams of carbs per hour. So I think when you do the math, I did the math on that, and I think it came out to it's somewhere like 5,000-ish. And I burned, I think my KJs were around 7,500. So my deficit wasn't that huge compared to what many people might be facing out there if they did less, or if you're like, say, Matt Beers and burning a lot more.
4,600 calories for 115 for 10 hours.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So
that's Did you experience gut distress, Hannah? Because that's something, we're going to get into that with some athlete questions at Race to Unbound later, but did you experience that then just kind of it got better, or because of the training, you didn't experience it?
Honestly, I didn't experience it. And it is because of training my gut. And so that was something I think, like Nate said, what did you do in training? I don't think you have to do super long rides leading into Unbound in order to be successful, because it was my first Unbound and I wanted to gain that confidence. I did do several very long rides, and part of that was to know, hey, what does it feel to continue to eat 115 grams at hour 9? Because it does feel different than hour 1. And in some of those rides, I did experience, wow, this is gnarly. You start to kind of get a gag reflex sort of situation, but working through that on the day of, none. I think your body just learns how to handle it. And I think that I'm sharing this because I think it's a very positive thing for people to hear, that I think a lot of people give up. Oh, my gut can't handle it. Oh, I can't handle it. Oh, this isn't for me. No, you just need time to practice it.
We talk about this so much. Instead of practice, I like the idea of training. Imagine the first time someone does 400 watts, they're like, I tried it. I've tried 400 watts before. It really hurt. I'm never doing that again. I just can't handle 400 watts, so I'll never do it. Where I think every person that I've talked to who's gone to a really high carbohydrate per hour rate, they all said they built up. And at first it was hard, and then it got easier. Every single person. Hannah, do you mind too sharing what's your height and weight of your size? Because that 115 is so much more than Jonathan, what's your height and weight?
Right now I'm 152 pounds, so probably somewhere around 69 kilograms, I think it is. And then I'm 5'11", and I can't remember what that is in meters.
And he used to, though, be like, I can't do more than, 60 or something, right?
Oh, yeah, no. Even less. I could never do it. Yep.
And there's a lot of men that I think are much bigger than Hannah who say, I can't do any more than that. And I think we've seen some research too that the larger you are, I think it does help.
Oh, actually, that's really interesting, Nate. Dr. Polagar mentioned that there may be some research coming out about that. And there's some pre-release stuff. I'm not going to say anything else, but I'm going to send it to you, Nate, because I feel like, and it was sent to me and said this will be very interesting for Nate. So it is quite interesting because we're actually getting research done on that specific question. So
yeah, you have bigger intestines. Like it's just longer. Like, I mean, how could it not? Right?
Yeah.
Andre the Giant, think of him versus like someone really small. So it's got to be some kind of relationship inside of there. So anyways, back to Hannah.
Yeah. So I'm 5'5", and I weigh 120 pounds, which I think is 54.5 kilos. So I guess
very small.
Probably, smaller than most of the people out there, with most of the people being men. Yeah.
The interesting thing is that there's a lot of people, there's a lot of voices talking about carbohydrate intake all the time. And there's a narrative that's developed for sure and it's kind of in line with what you were talking about, Nate, but I think that it actually kind of can be detrimental on the other side in the sense that they'll say, well, if you're a smaller person, you don't need to be taking in more than 60 or 90 or something else. And if you're a bigger person, you can be taking in more. Hannah's like a pro's pro, right? Like Hannah is finishing within 2 seconds of the winner at the biggest gravel race in the entire world. So I understand that and I recognize that.
On her first time.
Yeah, first time there, which is pretty crazy, ominous for competition next year. But within
I wonder
this,
sorry. Hannah, I just gotta say, I wonder what do you dream now about what would happen if you didn't attack on that hill? And kind of, because it seems like it's just because it went so fast. If it was a 11 mile per hour climb, it could have been way different than 20.
I've replayed it in my head like at least 100 times, different ways, different outcomes, it's so brutal. And I'm if you're not watching, like I'm saying this with a smile, but I mean, I all I can say kind of with a cheeky attitude is like, well, it gives me a reason to come back next year. You know, like if I had one, maybe it's like one and done. Like I don't really want to touch that one again. But definitely some unfinished business.
In my experience, when that sort of thing happens, every next workout, you don't give up. Like you're like, oh, that 2 seconds. I need 2 seconds. I need like 400 more watts. I need to hold those 400 watts for like 8 more seconds, right? At the end of this. And that's a whole year of training for me to get that. And it's going to happen at little moments throughout the whole year, just consistent the whole time. And it's such great energy and fuel.
Well, I think too, something that's really fun is it's also given me a different perspective on some of the group rides that I do, because I do use group rides for, like the racecraft aspect. And I think a lot of the time when I'm doing those group rides, I'm trying to take risks. I'm doing air quotes, take risks. And by that, I mean, attack early, see if I can make it stick. But now it's occurred to me, maybe sometimes that risk is waiting, because that's something I don't often practice, is like being willing to wait, to pounce. And I think in this particular race in Unbound, that is what I needed to do. And so I'll be curious now to have something different to practice in some of these scenarios.
Yeah, I have an opinion on those group rides. If you've unlocked the code if you cracked the code to win the group ride and it's easy for you, then go and try crazy things to see what sticks. But if you haven't been able to do that, try to ride it in a way that you can win. Like what's the way to increase your odds the most? Like you said, Hannah, in past years when it's so blown up because of being a mixed field, it's different. But in these situations, when you're coming down with such a competitive field, with tactics bringing in a big group to the finish like that, it's irreplaceable to have that sort of experience, to know what to do with that. And I lose that experience every year. Like, I don't know about everybody else, but I lose my sharpness and you kind of lose that intuition. And I feel like it's really important to gain it back. So that seems like a really smart observation, to try to quote, win those group rides like strategically, rather than just going out and getting a good workout with it.
I think something else really valuable for people to consider in a race like this, that another thing, like Nate said, have you replayed it? Like I've replayed the whole 200 miles as well, of thinking, what matches did I burn that I didn't need to? that I could have had later.
Yeah.
Because a race like Unbound, especially at the pointy end of the race, so much of it is about positioning and actually many high intensity, tiny efforts. So on those flats, we're often sitting in, we're rotating this, that, and the other, but there's a lot of short, steep climbs in Unbound, and we're going hard on them, anywhere, above threshold up to VO2 on a lot of these climbs over and over and over. And if you're leading them, getting a little bit of a gap at the top, if someone's attacking and you're always closing, these are all times when you're burning more energy than you need to. Like if you can sit in and have someone else close the gap, if oh, that person, they're not going to make it off the front, I don't need to chase. If you can even, for example, sag climb some of these shorter climbs. Like these are all ways that someone can save energy, and you never know when you might need it at the end.
Yeah. Sag climbing, for those who don't know, is when you start at the top of the climb. Let's say it's 10 riders long. By the end of the climb, you end up in 10th place. And if it's a flat afterwards, especially if they're rotating, there's no point into staying in that first position. Because you get to put out significantly less watts. Basically, the time that it takes to get over maybe takes 6, 7, 8 more seconds, and you can put out less power. I did that in a few of my races. You can see in the video of the of sag climbing, and also just leaving little gaps that other people fill in. Probably in the pros, they might get a little, I don't know. It's hard.
You have to be respectful. You have to be respectful, but I will say it's an interesting thought because when I saw my power from Unbound after the race, I thought, oh, that's good. That's great. But my immediate thought after that was, but did it need to be? And I think that's an interesting perspective of right? Is like, you need to be in that final sprint, but the least amount of power you can do to be there is actually the most optimal. So when I saw my power file, that was my first thought is, could it have been lower? I think that's a good perspective as well to hear.
Yeah, I have two comments on that. First, the group ride stuff. I've seen John do it too in the group rides. It's so effing annoying. He's using it as a workout because he's cracked the code. He can win the group rides, and he just like attacks. And it's, but the way that the other way to ride it for real racecraft is you put out the least amount of power until you put out all the power. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's the way that you usually win. And maybe that all that power is to a breakaway to the end. And then two, Hannah, there's respectful, but I mean, I think it's fine to look at 10 hours and be like, man, I can't close this gap right now. I'm so tired. I'm panting, right? You see it all the time in pro Peloton. Like, I am so tired. They see that and they're just like annoyed and go through it. And then at the end be like, psych, I was okay. I think personally, I think that stuff's fine. You don't have to be like, you know what? I'm feeling great, everybody. Like, look at me. I can do all this stuff. I'm going to close this really fast for you. Like, I don't know. Especially for something at the career at this high. How does that, can you talk about that, Hannah? Like, there's like this social peer pressure, right? To do certain things that are not good for you race wise.
Man, this is such a hard question because I feel like I'm still learning this. And as my first Unbound, this was definitely a big, like, what are you saying? What are you saying? What's everyone saying? What's everyone doing? Because like especially when there's a group of 9 people. So when you have a group of like maybe 3 or 4 people, you are very united in your purpose. Like Lachlan and Chad off the front, they did not want people to catch them. You are allies. There is no reason they shouldn't work perfectly together. When there's 9 of us in the front group, it kind of starts to break down because everyone wants everyone else to work. Everyone has different agendas. Maybe someone doesn't care if maybe someone's just happy to be there and they don't really care if the next group comes. Someone else is thinking, oh my gosh, we're going so slow. I wish I could go off the front with some. Like, everyone has a different agenda. And so it becomes much harder to organize the group. And everyone starts to kind of time out everyone else's polls. So in the last 20 miles of that race, if you had a microphone in that group of women, it would have been fascinating because everyone is just chirping at everyone else. I think it's almost this, I felt personally in the group trying to take it all in like it was a panic to establish an even playing field. Because as those miles tick down and everyone in the group becomes very aware it's going to be a sprint, people start to think, well, am I the strongest? Well, have I done too much work? Well, have they done enough work? And it becomes sort of a panic to, hey, you go to the front, because the person saying that, they feel like they're on the back foot. So it is a very interesting dynamic. I think personally, the person chirping the most is usually the person who's maybe the most nervous or most on the back foot. You also can't just let someone sit in the back of the group. Like it doesn't make, you can't. That said, there's no rule that you have to pull. So it is a really delicate situation, and I don't know the code to that yet. And I think a lot of road racers have a much better experience with that than I do.
Yeah, because road racing, it happens all the time. And when I hear the chirping, it's when somebody figures out what somebody's doing, as when they see it and they go, wait, I see you, you're being sneaky, and I'm going to peer pressure you. And then sometimes I just don't listen to them. I wish I could speak Czech or something and throw out some language that nobody knows. Right.
Yeah.
And then they'll do attacks, right? If they're really annoyed with you. But sometimes that's really bad for them. The other small tip on this, if you have a group, especially in gravel where there's not as much drafting, but there is still drafting, is on these little accelerations, if you're in, second, third place, just drop back to 10th. Let people flow over you so that your power profile doesn't look like this big spike and then kind of smooth out where it's much more round. Because those, them TrainerRoad workouts, those big spikes you do, I don't know, Hannah's probably have 1,000 of them, literally. If she had 800, it feels a lot better, or even 900, or those spikes just went to maybe 400 watts instead of 500 watts. It's just tough.
Yeah, for anybody thinking of this, think of the situation where you do, if you haven't done sweet spot hard start intervals, where it's a sweet spot interval, shouldn't be that hard, and maybe it's 10 minutes long, but you start with 30 seconds at low anaerobic, right? And when you do that, it is so significantly harder just for that one interval. Now, in a situation like Unbound, like Nate said, you've got probably over 1,000 efforts where you were probably over your threshold because of that sort of a thing. Yeah, it's all of that adds up for sure. This is, you're talking about the group kind of devolving into this. Suddenly everybody's hunting each other, right? And they're aware of each other. It's Everybody becomes Regina George. It's at the front, you know what I mean? It's
Seriously.
And everyone gets really critical of each other and everyone's focusing on that. When I was watching this via Instagram stories, it was low resolution and distant, so I couldn't really see much. And I just thought, wow, Sarah Sturm looks really good here. And I was thinking Sarah's really tiny. I know Sarah's technical and she has a lot of technical skills. So it's maybe Sarah's going to really do well with this sprint, and she went early. And then it wasn't until I saw the high res footage that Sarah was grimacing like crazy, for a long time leading into that. You could see her just gritting her teeth. I don't know if she was fighting cramps or something else, but super gritty ride by her, because you could tell she was really uncomfortable in doing that. But Hannah, you had a great poker face when we're talking about athletes that one of the skills to have in the group. Like you said, if there were missteps at the very least, I feel you just looked like you were so calm and collected and everything was smooth sailing. And that's a big thing too, because when everybody turns into Regina George, just in, middle school or high school, and you're judging everybody's outfits like that, you're judging every single thing that the athletes are doing around you. You're looking at their shoulders and how they carry them, how they're wobbling on the saddle, if they're pedaling with their toes pointing down. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And you're trying to figure it all out. It was so cool. Number one, I feel personally invested into Hannah's stuff. I really appreciate what Hannah does for the podcast, but then also Hannah's an awesome person and she shares a lot with people. So it was cool to see that and to see you all get your own race. It felt like we were finally getting to see all these amazing athletes not be handicapped. We got to see it on display. It was so dang cool. I was super bummed that Sophia had mechanicals and wasn't able to be in that battle because, another friend and everything else. But it was so cool to see the finish. And I know that it probably stings like crazy, but my gosh, what an incredible ride. I'm sure everybody listening to this right now can chime in with their support in this. It's first time doing Unbound. That's amazing. I can't believe it.
How lucky are we to have her on the podcast too, right? I don't think people kind of realize how fast she is sometimes. And then they're like, oh, there's another pro. And then like, yeah, like really 2 seconds off. You could have won. I'm sorry. Like every time you probably hear that, it hurts. I want to preface this next one with like, just, I don't really know anything, Hannah. Just so take that. But if it happens next year, what I want to happen, I want to see it like the end is you be like, does anyone have any water? Do you have any water? Like, could I have some gels? Like, does anyone have any water? And then just like leave little gaps and have everyone fill those in. Like
just yell out pickle juice. Like, yeah.
Pretend like you're just happy you're just happy to finish in the group, right? To stay on. And then blow their socks off, short or long, later on at the end.
Especially if there's
that's what I want to see. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It was awesome, Hannah. Just super inspired. That was a great race. And now I guess is the next one, I'm trying to think, is it Leadville for you guys?
The next Grand Prix race is Crusher.
Forgive me. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And is Rad Dirt still really late in the year? And is that part of the Grand Prix? I can't remember.
Yes, still part of the Grand Prix, and it's in September. Yep. But for me, I'm going to Marathon Mountain Bike National Championship next.
Ooh. Is that in Alabama again?
Yeah, which is this weekend. So a quick turnaround from Unbound. Very different type of racing. So should be exciting.
That's awesome. I'm excited for that.
You're going to be fit. Well, how are you going to wait? Yeah. We need to talk about how you're going to handle that. Well, first off, how do you feel after Unbound and how do you recover and what do you do between that?
Yeah. So again, I think so much of this comes down to learning your body, yourself. And personally, I think, again, the diet. By that, I mean, after the race, for me, that, in my opinion, was the most critical time. Basically 24 hours post-race of getting my body back up to, standard fueled situation. And so for me, like the second I crossed that finish line, it was about putting calories and fluids back into my body, not allowing myself to sit in that deficit for any longer. And so, yeah, I felt rough the day, like the 24 hours after, but I felt like once I hit that capped off place where I had replenished those calories and fluids, I've been feeling pretty good. And then I think from a training aspect, it's not actually listening to that, hey, I feel pretty good, but honoring the effort that your body just did and taking it easier, not putting yourself into a big deficit again quickly. And so I've been taking it pretty easy and doing much shorter workouts, just with some short, more high intensity stuff because Marathon Nationals, it's still a marathon, but it's going to be so much shorter. We're talking like 3 hours. So that's much higher intensity than Unbound was.
It's like a short track for you now.
Yeah, I know. It feels like it at this point.
Do you have problems eating in those 24 hours? Like after Leadville, I could not eat a single thing. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, this has been the learning process that has been so fascinating to me because I think that I felt like when I first started doing these things, exactly what you're saying, it's impossible to eat. It's just, this is not going to happen. I feel terrible. But learning that, and again, I'm not a dietitian, so I don't, everyone has different needs. So I don't want to advocate for something that is maybe not perfect for somebody. But for me, that 24 hours isn't about what I'm eating. It's about that I am eating. And so a lot of my calories at that point are coming from somewhat liquid, high calorie sources that my body can tolerate. So, I do have my recovery drink to get in that protein. I drink a lot of Coke because it's so easy on the stomach and it's carbonated. Milkshakes are like my best friend at this point. And usually at that point, once I've hit a certain threshold of calories, that's when it's like, okay, now I can start eating more normal food. And another huge thing for me has been reintroducing fiber slowly. I don't know if you've ever finished a long race like that and then eaten like a big bowl of oatmeal the next morning, or like, man, I've eaten so many gels, all I want is a salad. Like, yeah, sometimes you have that sensation, but that is what really messes up my gut, because my gut is like, what is this leafy stuff and how do I process it? Instead, I go through a very regimented, okay, I'm going to include a tiny bit of fiber, a tiny more fiber, a little bit more fiber, so that my body's not shocked by that reintroduction.
That's good advice, actually. I have had food poisoning. I'm still getting over it. It's been like 5 days. I lost 10 pounds. Water and glycogen. That's a good example, though, of like, if you don't eat for a while, water and glycogen, and why if you're on like a keto diet or something, you just lose a lot of weight. I actually didn't lose 10 pounds, but I started eating some vegetables on day 3 and it just set me back. It was so hard. I think I should do like potatoes and Coke. And maybe not milkshakes, lactose intolerant, but yeah.
Maybe not then.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed too with this, Hannah, and Nate, maybe you've noticed this too. This is not scientific. This is very much my own experience. I want to preface this. When I get that sometimes after, even it doesn't have to be like a really gnarly ride like Unbound, but after just like a bigger or harder day where I just can't eat afterward, many times it's because I'm dehydrated, even though I think I drank enough or for whatever reason. And when I really focus first on like, and I don't feel like it, by the way, I do not feel like drinking water. I don't feel like drinking electrolytes. And that's always like the sign to me that I'm in a bad spot. And like I am dehydrated is when my body's like, I don't want food. I don't want water. I don't want electrolytes. I don't want anything. I'm just fine. Let me lie down here and die. And in that situation, it's like I have to fight the impulse and just be like, drink first. And like I just get a bunch of water in, I get in a bunch of sodium to be able to get like the electrolytes. And honestly, it's probably somebody is probably going to be upset by this, but one of the things I go for after a ride like that is French fries. Like, and I don't go and get something like super oily or something else like that that's going to mess up my gut, but it's a ton of sodium. And then it's like Hannah said, I'm not dealing with a bunch of fiber or anything else like that. It's pretty easy to digest. I get a bunch of carbs pretty quick. So
would you be upsetting?
Oh, I don't. Some people get really upset if we don't say eat leafy greens for every single meal.
Comment below.
On the bike.
I think this is such a mistake that people make. I just think that's such a mistake. Mm-hmm. People think that
French fries.
Get him. Hannah's
Get
the person.
No, the idea that like in order to eat well, it always has to look a certain way. Like, especially after an effort like Unbound, that's not a standard human effort. So why would you think you need the standard human diet? Like, I just think that what we're putting our bodies through is so unique. And sharing one other thing is I do think, like you're saying, I don't want this, just let me lay here and wither away. Like, this is a very common experience, and I don't want to make it sound like I have it fully dialed. And this is a place where I think support system comes in really well, because when I finish an effort like Unbound, I'm cracked, I'm tired, I don't really want anything. I'm sitting there in shock, like, what just happened? What was that sprint? Let me sit here and replay it. Let me do this, that, the other. Let me talk to my friends. And I very clearly communicate to Clayton before the race, I am going to be not myself. I am going to not be aware of time, because time does slip away so much in that finish line. Like, I need you to look at me and say, this is your past and future self saying you must consume this. And like, I give you full permission to like latch onto me and pressure me into these things that I know that I need. And I think most of us do need that in that time, because we are not thinking straight and we need someone who is.
Oh, that's so true. So true.
I have a pro tip. There are these, I started having these like Zulu water bottles. You can't really see them too much, but the cool part about them is they have time on them, little marks, 9, 11, 1, 3, 5. So basically it gives me a target. And when I have a target, this is the half gallon size that I'm showing, but there's a gallon size that I've been using, and my skin has actually been less dry. So that's good. I'm on Accutane, so I need to drink a lot of water. But I think after a big race like that, having the gallon one with some electrolytes and just trying to hit those time. Idea. Yeah. And during work too, because how often do you sit at your computer all day and you realize you didn't drink anything but maybe some iced coffee?
Literally
like
none.
Pretty
it's
much
like,
every day.
wow. I have drank a zero.
Literally none.
Today.
Literally none. You're like, did I pee at all today? No.
Nate, who made that again? What was it called?
Zulu, Zulu. I'm sure there's other brands. They're pretty cheap. Let's see. The half-gallon one's $14. Yeah. So again, I got the 128 ounce one, which is the gallon, which is what, 3.5 liters?
It's a lot. That's great.
Yeah,
I'm looking at it now.
So it's a lot.
We'll put some links in the description for people, so they can check those out. I think that's a cool idea, cool product idea. Hannah, can we answer some questions about Unbound really quick from athletes that have submitted them? Okay, Nick says, this past weekend, I raced the Unbound 200 in the under 29 age group category. I came in with a ton of confidence in my training, fueling strategy, and bike setup. I made the league group and felt great. Honestly, I thought the race was easier than I was expecting. I was right on track with my 100 grams per hour like I've done in training and every other race I've done this year. And I used the same drink mix and GU Roctane gels that I've used for a long time. After I flatted out of the league group around mile 80, I chased back on. I didn't get back to it, I think, because my stomach gave out. From mile 80 to 145, which was the next aid station, I couldn't keep anything down other than water. It's TMI, but I threw up 15 times and I could barely hold my lower zone 2 power. Oh, that sounds rough. Especially because, remember, this is mile 80 to 145. There's still 60 miles left. So I didn't feel like I was overheating or anything like that. And looking back at my power profile, I didn't do anything out of the ordinary for me. I've never been sick like that before while riding. And since I didn't have any changes in my fueling or anything, I'm pretty confused about what happened. Has this ever happened to you? Any insight would be amazing. And I want to point out really quick, I actually know who Nick is. He picked up cycling, and I feel like within like a year, he was like winning Cat 1 races in NorCal. It was wild. Like very, very good cyclist. I know now he has different pursuits in life, so maybe he's training a bit less. But we should understand Nick is the 1% sort of athlete that's like really, really, whether it's naturally gifted or anything else, that's Nate's kind of performance level. So with that in mind.
Not Nate.
Or Nick, yeah.
We wonderful.
Nate, we are the 99%, yeah, sorry. Yeah. So this is us guessing, okay? So like we have to preface this. We don't have any, we don't have insight into like the power profile or anything else here. But Hannah, what do you think when you hear this sort of situation where it's just suddenly like the switch is off and it's like what used to be food comes in or anything comes in, now it's only coming out?
Yeah, I have, like you said, it is just guessing, but I do have somewhat strong opinions on this because I hear this type of story a lot. I think the first thing that I'm less attached to, but is definitely something to consider is, you know, the duration of the race. Like we talked about earlier, it is different to fuel at 100 grams of carbs for 6 hours than it is to fuel at 100 grams of carbs for 10 hours plus. So it is possible that at a certain point, your plan just broke down because your body wasn't used to the sheer volume that you had consumed. But more of what I see when people start talking about the vomiting, and it's funny because Nick said that they vomited 15 times, and I feel like this is a common thing that people will say, like, I vomited X amount of times. It's not just like I threw up or I had gut distress or I couldn't keep anything down. To me, when I hear someone talk about vomiting somewhat excessively, my mind always goes to dehydration. Because being dehydrated is a very classic thing that will result in vomiting. And it's not often the thing that people think of in that moment because vomiting equals, I don't really want to take anything in. And most people also, when they think of vomiting, they think of food, like what is not sitting well or did I eat too much? But usually it's actually the lack of hydration in your stomach that's causing that issue. And I think that would also make sense. One, for they said they didn't feel that hot, but it was still hot and it's still a long day. And when you start thinking, when you start playing it out, and this is going to be a topic that we talk about in a future question, but when you start playing out how much fluid you're actually losing and the amount that causes a performance deficit, you probably hit that really early in Unbound. And so I don't think it's a far cry at all to say, hey, you were really dehydrated.
Mm-hmm. Nate, this one, I think about when you were at Leadville and I gave you a really hot pack of Martin and you didn't drink it. You felt terrible at that line. And I doubt it was because you'd taken in too many carbs. I think you were just completely dehydrated, right?
I was so thirsty. I was asking everyone, do you have water? Do you have water? I agree with Hannah. Like, especially it feels easy in that front group. I know Nick's really fast, but when you're dehydrated, at first it feels great because you're lighter, right? And then you get to this point where like everything's hard, especially that chasing back on, like flatted, chase back on, maybe out there a little bit longer than it would have been, maybe not too long, but I could just see that the extra effort too, combined with being dehydrated or chasing back on to the men's lead group. Think of that effort, chasing onto the men's lead group after a flat. That's got to be super hard. All those things combined. And then I agree with you, the keep throwing up is probably dehydration.
Actually, so last week I had taken the week off for like a training camp. And it was really hot for the first time in our region for that year or this year. It was like 95 degrees, give or take a handful. And when I was out on the climb, and actually at one point my head unit was reading 110 just because like the radiant heat from the cars and everything else. It was really hot. And I brought these huge bottles from Zefal, I think Zefal. I have really tall ones that I bring on these rides, and I brought enough and I was like, cool, I'll camel it for 4 hours with this because it should hold enough for me to take in, 500 to 750 milliliters per hour. And with these 2 bottles, I'll be fine. And I got 2 hours into the ride and I was out of fluid. And like, because it was so hot. And then I ended up fueling up at a gas station, filling up with a bunch of ice and water. 2 hours later, I did the same thing. And I was like, wow, I drank so much. And the whole time I was really worried that I was going to be like drinking too much and maybe feel a little weird. Nope. And then for the other 3 days that I did big rides, the same exact thing. That was what I was taking in. My point is, I did not think that I would be able to take in that much. And I felt great. Good enough so that after every one of these rides, I ate a meal as soon as I got back. And then after that, it was like, I don't have to lay down on the ground and on the couch. I can play around with my kids. I can go and see, like I can do things. I can live. And I think that a lot of us underestimate how much fluid we lose because we build up in our minds that we need a bottle an hour. But we don't think of the fact that once you get into hot conditions, it totally changes. I remember like it's going to be burned into my mind forever. Nate, in Hawaii, we were riding at Kona during Ironman World Championships. We stopped at like a post office out. Nate was like laying down against the steps, and just like it was like a hose was on him. The amount of water that he was sweating at that time, and we don't realize how much water we lose just through respiration. We don't, even though you may not feel like you're sweating a lot, like when you're up at Leadville and instantly your sweat evaporates because it's so dry up there. You just lose track of it. And it's really easy to get into a spot where you are dehydrated, even though you think that you're checking the boxes. Like we need more fluid, I think, than we think. So, and that gets really complicated though when you're starting to mix in your carbs with your drink, like with the water that you're drinking, because then you can get into a spot where it's like, geez, I took in 180 grams of carbs an hour and I've never done that before.
I'm listening to this, John, and I'm thinking back, haven't I been the one always saying we should drink more? And you're like, no, we just need like a bottle or so. And I'm like, 100%. Have these giant bottles on my bike and like asking for this. For years.
Nate, I think I've said this before.
It takes time for everyone to catch up.
You're right, and I'm late. So like that's what happens. But this sounds like it for sure. The one thing I will say, aside from nutrition, and Nate, you kind of hinted at this, is if the first hour feels easy, or the first however many miles of this race feels easy, it's just not. Like if you're with the front group, it's probably not. There's so many other factors that are making it seem easier. But if you analytically look at the power file, and we're going to do this actually for an athlete coming up, so maybe I just save this part. Because I think that this is something that let's do this. Let's go into Zach's question because it illustrates this perfectly. He says, first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to TrainerRoad for making an amazing product. Thanks to you, I registered for and completed my first bike race last year, which was the 2023 Unbound Gravel 200. Zach, his first bike race was Unbound. Can you imagine that? First one. That's crazy. Not a crit, not anything else, not a road race, but he goes and does Unbound. Just this Saturday, I completed my third bike race ever, Unbound 200 2024. So you've raced one time in between then. That's a pretty intense palmares, like highly skewed. Okay. where I shaved 4 hours off of last year's time.
Just shaved it off.
Yeah.
4.
4 hours. Just a little bit there. Yeah. I think that's more like lobbed or chopped or buzzsawed. Met my primary goal of beating the sunset and met my stretch goal of finishing in under 13 hours. Adaptive training has let me crush key workouts while still finding the joy of riding outside with others, all without getting burned out. That is amazing. That is exactly the goal. I want you to be able to train and perform how you want while still getting the proper workout and rest that you need. That's amazing. Way to go, Zach. So here's the catch. He says, my question is this: what can I do to prevent or delay cramping? I found Hot Shots. That's like a product that you drink that has a very strong flavor and a handful of things that claim to address cramps directly. I think that we've talked about this before, but them making Chad puke like 30 times or not puke, but gag like 30 times after trying to drink them and stuff. Nate and I were laughing very hard. They don't taste very great. He says, but I consumed 5 of these over the course of the race and ran out. I tested my sweat sodium concentrations and sweat rates, and I think I did a good job of staying hydrated before and during the race, consuming over 11 liters of water and drink mixes between the start and the finish. I am a big guy at 6 foot 2 inches and a little over 200 pounds with an FTP of 320 and also a high sweat rate, typically between 1.2 to 2.2 liters per hour. Let's just stop. Actually, no, I'm going to keep going, because there's some key points there that we're overlooking already. I also was able to get down over 90 grams an hour of carbs. I went on a hilly 150-mile training ride a few weeks before Unbound 2. Despite this, at mile 140, I always start cramping. Primarily my hip adductor muscles, the inner thigh. I feel you on that. Those are always the ones that cramp on me too. My legs and body felt otherwise good, but the last quarter of the race, I spent a lot of time on my own and really had to pull back to prevent severe cramping. Do you have any thoughts on what I can do to prevent cramping during long efforts in the heat? I also take some supplements, creatine, beta-alanine, and on race day, bicarb and ketones in the morning before the start. These always work fine in training. It's hard to simulate a 12-hour effort at 0.78 IF, however. Could the cramping be due to supplement choices? If so, any tips on narrowing down which ones may be causing the issue? Thanks, from Zach. First, I guess on the supplement thing, I don't see any red flags with the supplements that would cause cramps there at all. In fact, like the creatine side of things, I really would love somebody to do a study where they look at like creatine's effect on cramps, because I have a theory that creatine would help and like kind of like reduce that. Just logically speaking, mechanistically, it would seem to make sense, but that's bro science. So that's not actual science. I have no clue. There's a handful of things that stick out to me about this. Hannah, how about you? Like, what red flags do you see in this one?
Yeah. So the first thing I kind of started doing some quick little mental addition with is their fluid intake. Man, this is a tough one because 11 liters, you did do a great job. That's a lot of fluid. However, like you said, you're a big guy at 6'2", 200 pounds, and you list your sweat rate at 1.2 to 2.2 liters. So we can kind of start doing some math here. A performance decrease is seen when you lose about 3% of your body weight loss in water. And for 200 pound person, that's about 6 pounds. So if 1 liter loss equates to about 2 pounds, that means that once you're in a 3 liter deficit, you are starting to experience performance decrease. At 13 hours and 2 liters of water, that's 26 liters loss. Like, you are well within the performance deficit side of things. That's obviously on the higher end of what you listed, 1.2 to 2.2. So again, we have to be flexible and think through it, but just kind of doing that quick mental math, you can see that even though you did do a great job, cramps are probably or likely in the cards for you, just given the fact that you are losing a lot out there. It's going to be really hard for you to put in what you are losing. And so whether that is a change that you can make and carry more fluids is something that you have to figure out on a strategy standpoint. But I don't think you can count out fluid loss for that reason of cramps.
Yeah, it's 14 and a half liters should be the minimum according to the sweat loss or sweat rate data that you have, that you should have taken in, because it took you 11 hours and 53 minutes, I think. So just before, basically 12 hours. So you should have taken in a minimum of 14.4. Like,
well, that's to be equal. You can still be in a deficit a little bit, just not as big a deficit. But it's highly. It was hot, right, Hannah? So 1.2 is probably that. He probably was higher than that minimum of 1.2.
Yeah, it was hitting 80, I think, out there towards the latter half of the race. So I would bet that, and it's humid, like it's Kansas. So I would bet he's on the mid to upper range of that level.
I also believe, like, my theory is at the beginning of the race, you probably had less water, right? It's like there's more people around you. And then once you do start cramping, you start you're like, I'm going to catch up and drink more water. You go slower. It's easier. At the aid stations, you're grabbing more stuff. So where you did do that water too, where you took that water in, think about if it was mostly in the second half or like after you cramped. And that could also be another key that you didn't drink enough water.
And I want to look at the effort side of things. So I completely agree, Hannah. Oh, sorry, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to, I saw that you were going to talk about effort. So I was going to kind of tee it up for you with that. I think the other thing too is, you mentioned that the duration was not a surprise. You did a 150-mile training ride. That's great. But was the intensity? How intense were your workouts leading up to Unbound? And then within Unbound, how intense were those efforts? Like we talked about with my race, the fact that if you do 800 efforts above threshold, those add up. And those are the type of efforts that can really lead to cramping as well. So that's something I'm also curious. It looks like, I wanted to say that because it looks like, Jonathan, like you have the file and you can answer those questions.
Yeah. I wouldn't say this is ideal pacing for sure. So super impressive ride. But in this case, if you look at it from mile 0 to 75, and this is looking at this, that's almost 4 hours, 3 hours and 46 minutes. By the way, I checked this because I was like, maybe he hadn't updated his FTP in a really long time, and actually we have like an admin tool where we can look at FTP detections for like specific days and that sort of thing. And I looked at this and adjusted it. It did think that maybe on that, like you would have been a handful of watts higher than you were. Okay. So if you're looking at this, just know it's, even though it'll be like 0.2 off, it's very close, or 0.02 off, I should say. But
I'm looking at what you're going to say, and this is insane. Keep going.
Yeah. So nearly 4 hours at 0.88 IF. And assuming like that right there, if you had done a 4-hour road race and you rode at 0.88, you'd be like, dear me, that is a solid effort, and you are going to be destroyed after that, right?
I'm looking at 3 hours and 45 minutes, a 0.9, 3,500 calories, 289 normalized power at a 257 average. So like it's like a little spiky, and then it starts up, and we can show this on the screen, and then slides down. Which is also like, that's a recipe, right? To like, if you want to cramp.
Yes, absolutely.
You drink all the water in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
You die, but yeah.
And then after that, you go into mile 76 to 150. And looking at that one right there, your IF dropped. It plummeted to 0.73. Right. So like that shows the effect right there of the first part of that race. And we say first part of that race, please keep this in perspective. It's Unbound. It's 4 hours. It's basically an entire normal race, right? So he did an entire normal race very hard, and then thereafter experienced cramping. Like, of course, cramps happen for so many different reasons, because when you think about it, so many different things have to come in to make your muscles fire. And a lot of that comes into nutrition for sure, but it also comes into just, have you overfired your muscles, so to speak? Like, have they done too much work? Are they not trained to be able to operate this way? And if you haven't trained them to be able to operate that way, it'll wreck them. And that doesn't mean that you need to go and do a 12-mile ride. That just means you have to keep in mind where your threshold is, and you shouldn't spend the first 4 hours of the race at 0.9 IF, which is what you'd expect for a short road race or something. You would not expect that for something that's like 4 hours, let alone something even longer. So in this case, if you wanted to have a day where you didn't experience cramping, and you probably would have had a way faster time, I know that like you're thinking, I got to stick with groups and that sort of thing, but it probably would have been faster to keep in mind like a power cap, and just be like, if my power is sitting so that I'm at 0.9 IF, I'm going to back it down. I'm going to try to ride efficiently. I'll even let a group go and sit with another group behind that, because I want to stick closer to like 0.7 up to 0.8. And I think that is a key thing, because if you look at the final bit that you did, mile 151 to 202, again, we're talking 0.7-ish. I did 0.67 with what AIFTP detection updated for you, but if you look at it, somewhere around 0.69, 0.67 is what you did. So it just declines, like Nate said. Starts out super hot, and then you just drop. And that's all because of the beginning of that race. I mean, or I shouldn't say all of it, but can't start a race that hard then expect it to go smoothly later on.
Your heart rate too for the first like 45 minutes, you're in the 170s, like pretty strongly. And then when you get into that probably good like 0.7 IF, you're in the low 140s, right? Like 30 watt difference in there. And it's probably that I could see that in the race. So, you know, it feels really good. John, you ever started time trial where it just feels amazing for the first
never.
minute? And then you get on some wheels and you're like, I want to stay on this. I am going so much faster. But it is probably faster to be an appropriate group overall. But still, they did amazing. Like they beat the sun and did 12:42. That's super impressive with cramps too. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I don't want to take anything away from like the result there. So
third race too.
I'm curious how you would advise this athlete, because I think I'm thinking of what they would say back to this, right? Their response back, I think, is going to be, well, I didn't plan on going 0.88 IF, but the group was going that fast. And if I got dropped from the group, then I would have been alone and my race would have been even longer. So what would you advise to this athlete in terms of balancing being with the group and therefore getting that free speed from the draft versus having to spend extra energy on your own?
Yeah, I would say after you started cramping, did anyone pass you in the race? Because there are people behind you that you can jump on from more groups. If you never got past the whole time, then yeah, you should have been in that group. But other than that, I bet you there were some other groups, probably groups of people that went by and you just wishing you were on that group the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Yes. There's this huge fear that we all have that if I miss this group, I'm alone for the rest of the race and that's going to be super slow. I've referenced my Leadville experience many times. At Leadville, I was riding and everyone completely blew past me. I was had a really good corral position. I was toward the front. I was up with pros in the front. We got to the base of the first climb and I stuck to my power targets. I was way back. And I mean way back. There were guys on single speeds passing me. There were people in jorts passing me. I'm short way socks. Back. Like you, yeah, socks were short. It was bad. So I'm way back there, right? Where I would not expect to be, but I stuck to my plan and I trusted my plan. I got down power line and I had already passed back probably like half the positions that I already had lost on that first climb by the time I got down power line. I get down power line and I get with this group. These guys don't look like guys that are going to be racing Cat 1 national championships, okay? They're like average mountain bikers. I find this group, they're rolling turns and I'm looking at it and I'm like, this is way too fast for me. This is way too much power. I'm going to drop off and I'm going to ride solo because I know that my plan says this. I stuck to that. I think I passed all of those guys within the next 20 minutes, right? And they had all shattered. And as a result, they were going backward. I spent the rest of the day just working my way through. And I'm not sure I got past for the rest of the day. You have to trust like physiology and numbers and limits. I feel like unless you're racing at the front like Hannah can't do that. Hannah's looking at a first place opportunity. She's not looking at numbers. And it's also because like Hannah passed the test to get up to that front group. Like she belongs there. She can do it. I don't want to say this in an exclusive manner, but if you see me at the front of a race like that, I don't belong there. I don't belong.
How many Leadvilles have you won, John?
0, right?
0, yeah.
Exactly. So why in the world would I think that I need to be up there toward the front? It's very different how us amateurs race things when we're going for a PR versus how Hannah does it. Yet most of us base our race strategy off of what we see on TV. And when we see that Unbound recap and we see Hannah like making moves and doing all that, we think that's what we have to do. But for us, like a lot of us just want to have a day that we can really enjoy and we want to PR and we don't want to blow up and we don't want it to be miserable. And in those situations, you have to pace yourself. And trust me, you're going to find it, especially at a race like Unbound, you're going to find people all day. You are not going to be alone. There are going to be people all day that you can ride with. You might be alone for a short little bit. There'll be another person that you'll ride with. And if you've paced yourself well, the cool part is you're going to be passing your way through them. And that's extra motivating to keep sticking to your plan too.
It's so much more fun to being on both sides of this and being the slowest person here by far. Y'all who do still race at the top, you don't have the experience, but if you do pace well on these big gravel races, you are in the back and then you get to pass people and you get to say, good job. Like as you're going by and that, it feels really good. And then you have like, you'll have a companion for like 30 minutes. And the companion will be like a Lord of the Rings or something. They'll be like, go on without me. Like, I can't do it anymore. Yeah, exactly. And then you like say like, I thank you for your service. And you kind of part ways and maybe see them at the barbecue afterwards. And you just keep having that experience over and over again. And it's way more fun to be Frodo than Sam. And get drunk all the time.
For sure. Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Like Nate said, Zach, super impressive performance, and like to be able to hold on to it. And I'm just like thoroughly impressed that your third race and 2 of them have been Unbound. That's pretty crazy.
You can go faster, Sam. You can go sub 12.
For sure. Yeah.
For sure, sub 12. Maybe like around low 11s. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you'll be able to get really close to the 11 mark if you paced it correctly. Like if you didn't change anything, had fitness the same, I'm sure that if I ran like a best bike split scenario and looked at this, of course it'd be hypothetical and this is a group, but I bet that it would show that you should be able to do that. So
maybe, mid 11, with more training too, maybe mid 11s. Mm-hmm. Another thing you were saying is making moves. If you're air quotes making moves early in a gravel race and you're not named Hannah, Otto, like don't be doing it like it. There should be no move making at all. It should be like you're in this huge peloton and you're just floating around, right? And there might be some time where you have to then a slightly faster group comes on and you do 4 extra pedal strokes to get onto that group. But it should be really like you're just floating through the whole field, right, until the end. And it would be nice if you like never put out anaerobic power the whole race. And I think that's possible at the lower end, or not possible for Hannah's group.
Yeah. Lane's question, he says, with so many gravel racers running actual mountain bike tires at Unbound, which we saw a lot of riders on 2.2 size mountain bike tires. A lot of people are running like short track style or like file tread style mountain bike tires, where it's like minimal tread in the center, hardly anything, more like texture, and then just side knobs on the edge. Should we take that as a sign that gravel tires simply aren't useful? Seems like they either run a large volume slick or an MTB tire these days. Hannah, what are your thoughts on this? Because we did see a lot of people with this. We even saw some people with mountain bike tires where they had gone through with the tire knob snips and they'd snipped off all the knobs in the center. So then that way they just had like edge knobs. There were a lot of different tire choices, but all of them were very fat and chunky. So do you agree that with this guy's kind of question he's posing, that they're like, who needs gravel tires?
This tire conversation frustrates me so much because I feel like when it comes to tires, people are so dogmatic. Like if I had $1 for every time someone told me X is the fastest tire, like it's so frustrating because I think the bottom line with tires is it really like the reason we have so many tires to choose from is because there are so many different types of courses and there are so many different types of people and riding styles. So yes, typically there is a tire that makes sense. Like you'll look through the field and most people are running this type of tire. So like at Unbound, most people were running a higher volume tire because the course was chunky. That said, as a smaller athlete, as a female athlete, I don't think that I need to run as large of a tire as some of these larger male pros who have more weight on their equipment and are riding at higher speeds and potentially more aggressively in a larger pack with the odds of hitting something more with like more surprise because they're hidden behind more people. So I think it just really depends who you are, your riding style, and the course. Unbound is a burly course. Big Sugar is a burly course. Personally, I don't think we're going to see mountain bike tires at Crusher. you need a faster rolling, narrower tire. Narrower tires are also more aerodynamic. So I think there is a place for each and every type of tire. So that very long answer for no, I think gravel tires still have a place.
Yeah, that's really well said, Hannah. And the aerodynamics thing is really interesting. I really would love, I know Specialized just seemingly doesn't put out content from their wind tunnel anymore. It makes me sad. I wish that they would do more of that stuff. I have heard this from aerodynamicists that do test these sort of things, that as soon as you put knobs on a tire, particularly like a lot of gravel tires have that have knobs on the shoulders, that it effectively causes enough turbulence that like the effort that you would go through to have a deep section rim and to have it perfectly matched to the width of the tire, because that's very important too. If your tire is significantly larger than the width of the rim, you might as well not even have a deep section rim, is what I've heard from aerodynamicists as well. But they say that once you have the knobs on the edge there, that it causes enough turbulence in terms of how the air is going to flow over that tire, that it's really irrelevant in terms of like what size, width things are and everything else. It kind of takes out any of those sort of changes that you would have. It would be really cool to get more clarity and information into like that. But I think gravel, the reason that everybody, like Hannah said, the reason that everybody's picking it is you have so many options that you can run, and their courses are changing and you're going to optimize it depending on how you ride, all that stuff. It's really, really well said, Hannah. So, but I sense a little bit of like, is this the bike industrial complex trying to pull the wool over our eyes that like gravel tires are necessary? And I don't think that that's, I don't think that's the case, you know, so.
Have you both had it where, or gravel or mountain bike, you're on the road and you're going so fast that you hear your tire sizzling in the air?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
You can it's like hear knobs in particular.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a bad sign if you hear it sizzling, for like drag at least. And that's why I wonder too, just frontal area, even if you do have the knobs either way, the frontal area will be smaller. So I'm with Hannah that maybe a narrower could be better aerodynamic wise.
But I don't know
I think the important thing in this is there's 3 well-educated people on like weighing into this, and we have slightly different opinions still. And to me, that is the point. And I think within the pro field, we are really trying to optimize. And that's why we agonize over some of these decisions. Sometimes I see amateurs agonizing over some of these tire choices. The way you pace will impact your race more than the exact tread, you know, that you pick. And I think that said, tire choice is still very important. I'm not saying just go willy-nilly, but I think the way that I see people panicking over these minute details, like there is a general tire that is best for this course. And as long as you are within that general concept, you're good to go.
Yeah.
Hannah, but what if I want to agonize about everything? The point is to your needs though. Like when we race stuff, John always races with less knobs and I need more, and I go faster with more knobs, where John goes faster with less knobs because he is a better handler. And so it's not that just like a specific tire. And on gravel too, we always use different tires. And my setup was mountain bike, like the Epic, with like a gravel tire, and he would have a gravel bike with what would you use a gravel tire too? Yeah, you would, obviously.
Yeah.
But for me, I felt a lot safer, especially descending. I could have a little skinnier tire, but with the suspension, and there was a weight difference, but not that much. And that was an aerodynamics too for my handlebars, but the comfort too was so much better that all of that, the balances, I can't wait till more age groupers do mountain bikes on gravel races.
Well,
yeah,
I think
like more of them should.
Yeah, I think the reason I get passionate about this is because walking around the venue, I will have complete strangers weigh into my tire selection, even. And
They're mansplaining the tire. Hannah, this is why, you know how much more you would have won at Leadville if you would use this tire? Hannah, let me tell you the ways. And your cadence is wrong, and you should think about your nutrition plan.
Yeah. Well, the cadence on
Hannah's laughing because it's happened.
Yeah. I am. And I just, man, I mean, all of that, like the fact that it's funny aside, is just like, well, you know, unless of course we have the same riding style, we're the same weight and on the same bike and on the same wheels and running the same PSI, we don't.
In the same person.
We don't need to run the same tire. Like what's right for you might not be right for me. And so at least for me, I think tires are a really hot topic at races. And you can stand on the start line and look down and see a huge range of selection, oftentimes even within the pros. And what I have found to be the most important is that I have full conviction in my choice, because just because someone runs something different doesn't mean I'm wrong or I'm right, or it's okay. Like maybe we're targeting different areas of the course, or we have a different riding style or a different goal in terms of like, oh, I'm targeting the climbs today and you clearly want to win the descents or whatever it might be. I just think that there's a large range of reasons that people pick different things.
What tires did you run? Everyone's going to want to know.
Yeah, I ran 47C Kenda. They had a prototype tire out for Unbound. So I ran a prototype. Yeah.
Can't talk about it.
Or did I say 47? I meant 45 if I said that wrong. 45C. Excuse
45.
me. Yeah.
Can you talk about the tread pattern or anything, or why you chose this tire?
I'm not sure exactly all that I can share, so I will be limited.
Right.
But
how about this?
Yeah. Go ahead.
All of the really knowledgeable people, please go in the comments on YouTube and tell Hannah what tire she should have actually ran and her cadence and fueling should have done. And just do a huge thread and fight about that, please.
Like I said, the cadence thing is my absolute favorite. Last year at Tahoe Truckee Gravel, we were riding, and Haley Smith was there. And I remember a guy rolling up to me. I have no clue who this guy was. And Haley was like, we were seeing her dangle off the front of the men's group. So like she was crushing it. And he was like, man, those pro women, they always ride with too high of a cadence, huh? And I was just like, and I just looked at him. I just shook my head.
What?
Like who are you? And why do you care about that? Like,
well, I think he would be very
leave
shocked.
them alone. She's dropping you as you speak. She's dropping you.
Yeah, right.
Like, why would you opine about that? Like,
and I think he would be very shocked to know that my average cadence is usually in the 70s. So I break down his system.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah.
Whoa.
He probably go, I see. Look how well she does.
There you go.
And that is not my proudest fact. That's something I need to work on.
We did a lot of tire testing before this race, a lot of it, tire and wheel testing and chassis change testing, lots of different stuff. And there are so many options for a gravel racer. And we did it in a testing environment that I'm pretty confident on in terms of how it will work out. And the one thing I will say is that larger volume, if matched to rim width, performs better than people think. And knobs do absolutely have a pretty detrimental effect on speed. And I think that with so many options, there's a lot of people that just kind of make this sort of decisions of just like, it's fine, it's a wash, or it's similar to this sort of tire. We didn't see anything that was like, wow, this is, 10% faster or something else. However, within that, like looking at all the different changes, I think a lot of people are afraid to go wider. But if you have wide rims to match the wider tires, then yeah, it does seem to be pretty beneficial. But there's so much opportunity for optimization here. And so that's why we see a lot of different choices. But it'd be really interesting to see if companies can justify, because it's a big market, but if you have so many different choices, it's tough to justify like a lot of R&D costs to go into like developing a bunch of different options if it's too expensive. But really curious to see like what brands do here, because there's definite like trends that are faster. So but yeah, that's quite interesting to see. Okay. We're just going to do 2 more questions here. This first one, Patrick, you're asking about if we use silicone spray on bikes or PAM, like you can use that too, like cooking spray. Hannah, did you use this on your bike at Unbound in an effort to not let things like mud adhere?
No, I mean, there wasn't really mud on the day. I mean, I've heard of this before, and I have done this in cyclocross before. So this isn't a novel concept, but I'm not fully bought in on how much of a difference it makes. Personally, I'm curious what you all think.
Yeah, like it was a huge thing back in the motocross days because you'd get mud that would cake underneath your fenders and cake all over your bike. And our dads didn't want to wash like a really muddy bike in between motos. And so they just like coat our bikes with PAM, which then smell terrible when you're like, it was burning it off when you're sitting there on the line. But it doesn't have as big of an effect as everybody thinks. So it does help somewhat. I use Maxima SC1 silicone spray on my bikes after I wash them. You have to make sure that you don't get that on your rotors, by the way, or your brake pads. So I have little like covers that I put on my rotors and brake pads. Otherwise,
slippery.
Yeah, it's like your brakes won't work for like 10 feet, and then after that they'll squeal because you just glazed silicone spray onto there. So you have to watch out for that. But I do that just because it's good for suspension bushings, and it kind of adds like a protective like conditioner layer to my bike because I like fancy this shiny things. But it doesn't do a whole lot of help when you're talking about mud hitting, and the reason for that is because dust accumulates, and then when it hits onto the dust, it still adheres to the dust. It still finds a way to stick, so it's not some sort of catch-all. But the real question that I want to get to here is from Elise. And this one I had flagged for you, Hannah. It says, first off, I love listening to the podcast, and it's been a huge help to me as I've started taking racing more seriously recently. My question for you guys may not apply to the majority of your listeners, but I think it would be an interesting topic to discuss. I'm an 18-year-old female Cat 1 cross-country mountain bike racer. I've been racing for 4 years, and over the last 2 years, I've been training with a coach and racing for a local Devo team. I've put in a ton of work and done well at some big races for the first time. I feel like going pro is actually within reach. I'll be going to college this fall, but I also want to see how far I can take my cycling career. Any advice for a young, aspiring pro mountain biker? Should I be focused on doing well at the big races like nationals or UCI races? Should I be seeking out sponsorships or trying to get on a U23 development team? And how do I go about doing these things? From what I've noticed at the junior level is that most opportunities have come just from knowing the right people and making connections. Is the pro level similar? I just don't know how much more money I can pour into racing, from travel to gear to nutrition, especially when I'm going to college later this year. At the same time, I feel like I have so much more potential. I love racing at a high level and I don't want to stop. Hannah, this is tailor-made for you. Well, what would you tell, in this case, what would you tell Elise?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a big question, and the reason it is a really big question is because in cycling there is no clear path to being a pro, and I think in some ways that's great, and in some ways it can leave people feeling really lost. The reason I think it can be great is because there are so many ways to be a quote unquote pro in cycling, whether you're an influencer or an ambassador or a World Cup racer, or you're on a team that pays you, or you're a privateer and your own sponsors pay you. There's just a lot of different ways that you can make it happen and make it work. And I think too, that's where it also comes in, is you have to decide what being a pro means to you. Does being a pro mean leveling up and racing in the pro races, or does it mean making a living off of cycling? There's just a lot of levels to that within this world, and a lot of ways to go about it. I think for you, the main focus has to continue to be having fun and finding a sustainable way to do the sport. And by sustainable, I mean not getting burned out, continuing to love it, continuing to want to race, but also financially. I know that it is expensive, like you said, pouring into the races, travel, gear, nutrition, etc. And so that's where I think sometimes people can feel very overwhelmed, because since there is no one specific way to go about it, a lot of people will try and tell you a way to go about it. And sometimes those ways feel really financially unavailable. So that's one of my encouragements, is if a way does not make sense to you, if it's overwhelming to you, it's probably not your way. I personally don't believe that in my career there has ever been one race that was make it or break it. And so I would encourage you that same thing as well. Like, if one race is just exponentially expensive, don't let anyone make you feel like it's that or a bust, because I think that is what creates this unsustainable way. I'll hear a lot of young athletes say things like, I'm giving myself 1 year to go pro, and if I can't make it, then I'll get a normal job. And I think that creates a lot of stress and a lot of pressure that it is unsustainable. You're saying 1 year, whereas I would rather see someone find a job that allows them to continue to race in some way that is flexible, that they can take their time to move through the ranks, because you never know when you're going to make it and when you're going to be ready. And it takes everyone different amounts of time. And I think that to dive into some of your more detailed questions, like should you be focusing on big races like nationals and the UCI races? If those are the types of races you want to do, if you want to be a World Cup racer, probably, because that's where the teams and the sponsors and the people that you want to know are going to be looking. So whatever you want to put your stake in the ground in is probably what you should be racing, because if you get results there, people will notice. You don't have to necessarily know someone when you first go there. If you do well, people will notice. So you can put your head down and find confidence in that. The next thing you said, is a U23 development team the best way? I think probably. And that's because it's the most approachable step to being a pro, and they can help you make the connections that you need. It doesn't have to be the most professional U23 team out there, as long as you are taking advantage of the resources that they provide and attempting to be the most quote unquote professional you can be within that team. So if that team is sponsored by a bike brand or a nutrition brand, are you being the best athlete you can be for that brand? Are you reaching out to get to know the people working at that brand? Are you learning about the product so that you're a good advocate for the product? All of these things are ways that you can not only be the best you can be for that team and therefore have a bigger connection with your team and develop relationship with that team, but also those sponsors. If you want to go the privateer route, then knowing those sponsors that your team is providing is also an opportunity that once you age that out of that U23 team, maybe you go to the sponsors of that team and say, hey, I'm aged out of this team, but I'd love to continue working with you somehow. These are all avenues and ways that you can continue to grow.
There's a huge gap here for like junior athletes getting into then being a professional in cycling. It's kind of like soccer in the United States. There's a huge gap. Kids play soccer, and you can play it at a competitive club level, and then it just disappears. There's like, how in the world do I get to the point where I'm a professional soccer player? It's pretty tough. If I had just had limitless money and limitless time, it'd be a really fun project to try to solve, and like rewarding, I think, to try to help athletes out like this and give them a good trajectory and a pathway. But yeah, it's a tough one. Like you have to make bets on yourself, and you have to work toward it. Sorry, Nate, go ahead.
I'm not been a pro on this side. I've been on the business side about sponsoring other athletes. One thing too, listening to Keegan experiences for so long, he focused on World Cup racing, really high intense, like going against Nino and stuff in Europe. And he found that wasn't his strengths. And he kind of, I'm putting words in his mouth, right? But what I saw is maybe he thought that was the path forward. And then when he switched to longer stuff, which was his strength, mops up, right? And I think he's probably more successful. I know he's more successful doing that versus going on things that maybe he thought was the way because somebody told him was the way. So I would go towards your strengths too in this. And the whole other side of this is, so as a business person, I want people who are connected, like they have a social following, they're connected, they're honest, they're vulnerable, they're like real with their crowd, rather than somebody holding up like I have a fidget spinner, but like holding up a shoe and being like, I love this shoe. That's different brands, different people, right? The really big brands like Specialized are going to want just whoever wins World Cup holding up a shoe or something, or racing your bike. But there's whole other path of you don't have to win any races at all, but you have to like tell your experience and people sharing that experience through, people would definitely sponsor John and I just because we have this platform and we're sharing our experience and they want us to use their stuff. Like people all the time. I'll win win a Cat 3 race, right? That's it.
Yeah.
I don't have to win a World Cup race to get that kind of thing and to live off that side of it. So two, if you really want to do this, and Hannah alluded this too, there are different routes. You don't have to win a World Cup race in order to make this your job. So especially you're 18, I would try a bunch of things. You're in college. It's never going to hurt to have a social following, and it could take years to build up. And if you're 18, you probably understand it a little bit better than someone who's 32, 35. And I would just try it. And
the one thing I would say with that is there's so much pressure, particularly on young women, to be somebody that they aren't, right? With building up social following and everything else. And I think it's so crucial, like what Nate and Hannah said, like it's so crucial to be yourself because, and as you're going throughout this process, like find what really like sparks joy for you. And that's the sort of thing you should pursue. That way you don't find yourself leveraged in a spot where, like, let's say that you really do, like, you care about results and that's the thing that you really want to focus on, but you tried to be somebody that wasn't true to yourself, and now you have this massive following and you're beholden to them. That creates so much stress and emotional like trauma, truly, for people in those situations. And the same thing goes on the other side. If you just really enjoy relating to people, sharing your experience and doing that, and then you're caught in a situation where you have to deliver on results, it's also extremely tough. So much of this is like, it's never been a better time, I think, is what I'm getting from Hannah, because we have so many different options. I'm super inspired by Sevilla Blanc. I'm super inspired by Hannah, by all these athletes, but that doesn't mean I have to be them. I can still be me, and I can just take inspiration from them and follow and find my own path within this world,
My son's really getting into soccer, so I've been watching lots of TikTok stuff on that. And the thing that I love is like they're starting their pro career and they start a TikTok and they go, I'm starting my pro career. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to try this. This is what I learned. And as they learn things and they film their rides, they put clips up, you get to follow that experience because like, I want to see what happens. It sounds hard. Like, what do you do? Nobody knows. And I see this from other women playing soccer too, that they show their experience. They show their workout. This is what I did at 5:30 a.m. I woke up before school and I did this. And then, I did this, and they're good. They're not World Cup level, right? But I don't care. I'm so interested in the story and the development, especially the development at what their level is so exciting, right? I think a lot of people too are afraid to put content out there that isn't like the best of the content. I would tell you, look at our channel. I'm a really good example of this. I'm losing races. I'm cat 3-4 masters, 35 plus million views on the video. You don't need to be at this really high level in order to have an interesting story and content for people to like.
Yeah,
I think too, a big point though is that it does take time, or at least it can take time on all aspects of this. Like if you're trying to gain a following, a little bit at a time adds up. Like it's not necessarily about finding one video that goes viral overnight. I mean, if you can, great. But a lot of the time for most athletes, I see it just being chipping away. Same thing with results. Like you don't have to be on the podium in your first season. My career has very much been like 25th, 20th, 15th, like just moving up. And I think that a lot of the time people give up before they have the opportunity to fully express their ability on all aspects. And so I think even though it might feel very abstract at this point in your career, that is my biggest encouragement to you is do not give up, because it takes time. And like, what if you're just one season away from expressing your greatest ability? Like, just keep pushing, because you never know when you're on the precipice.
It's such a good, like for startups, it's the rule of thumb is that it takes 2 years in order to get traction, like working full time. And so many people stop after a year or a year and a half. It is tough. I had another point. Oh yeah. Have you ever told the pot story? I always say it at work, but I don't think I've done.
If we have, we should tell it again, because people probably haven't heard it recently.
Okay. I don't know if this is actually a true story, but it's a great story. So there's a pottery class, and the group is divided into 2 different groups. And one half the class is supposed to make one perfect like clay pot, or one pot at the end of the season, At the end of the semester, they're going to be judged on how well they made this one pot. The other half of the class is going to be judged on how many pots they can make. It's just sheer outcome. But the end of the semester comes, turns out the group that made the most pots also had the best pot, because through the process, they naturally just kept making it better and better and better, refining it until they got it down. And it'd be so silly for us too in training or racing to think of, I'm only going to race once and it's going to be Unbound and I'm going to win. And same with content. I'm just going to make the best content. Our own videos with TrainerRoad, better and better and better and better, right? We do this here. And now John's putting out fantastic videos on our YouTube channel, TrainerRoad. And it's an evolution, right? And I don't think we could have just jumped there ever, John, right?
Yeah.
It would have been impossible.
Yeah. And it's funny because you look back and you're always tempted to say, why didn't I just do this? But I guess the whole sum of where you are is because of all those parts that added up. And there's no way to shortcut your way there, for sure. Mm-hmm. I think that emphasizes and allows you to be yourself too, and to like learn at your own rate, like what Hannah's saying. Yeah.
The other one is the think of where you want in the end and go back and figure out the steps needed to get there. And if you want to race at these levels, like how many races do you need to do per year? How many workouts do you need to do per week? Your downtime. That means how many hours should you sleep? Like what should you be eating throughout the day? Like how many meals should you eat per day? Should you skip meals? No, You know what I mean? All these little small
exactly.
things that add up to it. I was talking to my son where he wants to be a soccer player. And we're trying to think of like, by the time he's 13, we estimate like 1 million touches, right? In practice. So we're like, okay, each practice, if we practice this way, it's this many touches, practice this way. If we go slow, it's this many touches. Now, how many per week would we have to do? And so how much time? And we kind of went backwards with that. And he was like, oh, so if I just do, this much hour per day, and I kind of have my practice like this, I can get to 1 million touches by the time I'm 13. And if I do it against another kid who just plays twice per week in his like local games or that, he's maybe in a game getting, 20 touches, and I can get 700 if I really practice well with a rebounder and stuff and like dribble around. I can really outperform other people. And I like that way of breaking it down because it makes it so much, when it's a huge thing, you don't know how to get there. It makes it so much more achievable if it's just like, today I'm going to touch the ball this many times. Today I'm going to do a workout this long. Yeah, Hannah?
Was that inspired by Tiger Woods? I wonder because
this is a business thing.
I just saw something the other day that Tiger Woods had a rule all throughout his career and still does, where it's 1,000 touches a day. So he has 1,000 touches with a golf club to a ball a day. Could be putting, could be driving, could be chipping, could be anything. But that's what he does. And it's 1,000. And he said that when he plays his best golf, he's hitting his 1,000. When he isn't hitting his 1,000, he's not playing his best golf. And I think that like for cycling too, when you look at that, it's like hitting your workouts and making sure that like every week I'm doing this much. Like I have this many workouts, because it's so variable with cycling and intentionally different with volume. But knowing that like you're hitting your marks of being like, well, I got out on the bike this many times. I feel like it seems like a small thing, an inspecific thing, but boy, it delivers really good outcomes in the long run.
I also
Hannah,
encourage
thanks
you
a bunch.
a little.
Go ahead.
Just one more quick thing, a little bit of a little more objective thing that she mentioned, that she's going to college. I really encourage you to take advantage of the resources within your college for your athletics as well, because it is a time in your life when all of these things are very expensive. And a lot of the time when you're a student, you can gain access to these things for free or very inexpensive. So like if there's PhD candidates in sports psychology, maybe they need to work with an athlete. If there's a master's student in sports nutrition, like maybe they need an internship, or just, I really encourage you to dive into your collegiate resources. A lot of the time there's opportunity for VO2 max testing for people doing studies. These are all things that can be very hard to find in a different scenario, but in college, they're all at your fingertips. So dive in and use those resources. It's a really great time for that.
And use TrainerRoad. It's so cheap. Like when you look at the value that you get, it's insane compared to what you'd be spending on anything else. So it's nuts. It's like I was looking at it the other day. You can see this in a video that I'll link down below, but it's like when you look at the cost that you actually spend, you're saving that in like just a couple rides worth of gels. You know what I mean? Like 2 hours worth of gels, I think, and that's like your month. And it's really cheap, and it makes you so fast. So it'd be a great setup for a college athlete in particular. So Hannah, thanks so much for joining us. I'm stoked to hear how you do at mountain bike, marathon, national championships, crusher and the tusher, all the great things. If you want to follow Hannah, you can do that. Look for Hannah Otto on Instagram. We'll link to her Instagram down below. And aside from that, we'll talk to you all next time, and go and give TrainerRoad a shot at TrainerRoad.com. And if you haven't, that's the best way to help this podcast, is if you can get people to try TrainerRoad. 30-day money back guarantee. If it doesn't make you faster in 30 days, we'll give you your money back. We're happy to do it. We'll talk to you all next week. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.